Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Welcome back to day 2 of the 2025 Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. On behalf of the Partnership for Strong Communities, I'm Chelsea Ross, Executive Director. I'm thrilled to kick off another full day of learning and connection. If you're joining us for the first time today, welcome. We are so glad you are here. Let me start with a quick reminder of who we are. The partnership works to advance solutions to Connecticut's housing challenges through advocacy, research, and convening. We serve as a trusted source of information, helping strengthen public understanding, build momentum, and bring partners together across sectors and across the state. And we work alongside all of you to move toward a shared vision for Connecticut's housing future, for our families, our communities, and our children. We envision a Connecticut where everyone has a safe, stable home that's affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. Our guiding principle is simple and powerful, that housing is a human right. Our work spans the full housing stability continuum, preventing homelessness to long-term affordability, opportunity, and choice. Our North Star is that fewer people should live without homes or in unsafe or unstable conditions, and more people should live in healthy, affordable homes in thriving communities across our state. So, how do we move closer to that vision? A healthy, functional housing system requires a holistic approach that integrates affordability, creation, choice, and stability. Everyone deserves to afford a home without sacrificing their other basic needs. Connecticut must continue expanding the supply of homes and ensuring a wide range of options in every community. And people deserve the protections and supports that prevent displacement, eviction, and homelessness. This is how we build a housing system that reflects the hopes, potential, and lived experiences of people across our state. I'm excited to share an announcement that on January 16th of next year, the partnership will release our first ever State of Housing in Connecticut report. This new annual publication will track progress, surface emerging trends, and highlight what's working. It's designed as a tool for policymakers, advocates, funders, local leaders, and community members, anyone committed to building a stronger, more equitable housing system. The report will bring together statewide and national data, not just to describe the problem, but to chart a path forward across affordability, creation, choice, and stability. And you can be among the first to read it. You can sign up today to receive the report on the day it's released. You can scan the QR code on the screen or follow the link in the chat. This is our 6th year hosting the CAHC. More than 615 people have registered this year, and we're joined by over 100 speakers from across Connecticut and the nation. Yesterday, we welcomed more than 430 people for day 1. We built this conference together to be a space that strengthens our knowledge and reinforces our shared commitment to housing justice in Connecticut. Yesterday, we opened the conference with a powerful keynote panel on how Connecticut is shaping the narrative around housing, who tells the story, whose voices need to be centered, and how narrative drives policy and public will. We then moved into a lively state legislative roundtable unpacking the special session, the passage of HB 8002, and what's ahead for housing policy in 2025. You joined an amazing set of breakout sessions, and I had the pleasure of seeing and meeting a few of you at the Bittersweet Lane book release party at Park City Music Hall. I got my signed copy of Jamie Madden's book, and I can't wait to dive into it. Today, we will get to build on that momentum. We'll start our morning with a critical conversation with policy leaders and national experts who are working on the front lines of federal housing policy. They'll speak candidly about the real challenges we're facing and the opportunities we have. They'll offer insight and strategy for advocates, local leaders, and organizations across Connecticut to know what we can do together to safeguard the progress we've made and push for the federal action we urgently need. Following a 30-minute break, and starting at 11 through 4 p.m., we'll head into breakout sessions. We have 12 sessions to choose from today, full of fantastic presenters talking about everything from Connecticut's housing inventory crisis, to young people leading housing research, to union-built and financed affordable housing, to supportive housing. The conference closes online at 4 p.m., and we're looking forward to many of you joining us for our in-person networking reception at our home, the Lyceum in Hartford, starting at 5:30 p.m., where we'll also be recognizing our 2025 Here for Housing ambassadors. We are proud to recognize these amazing people for their advocacy, leadership, and unwavering dedication to the housing movement. So I hope you'll explore today's full agenda and plan out a schedule that most interests you. You can see what's coming next in the lobby at any time. There's also a PDF version of the conference agenda pinned in the lobby chat. As I noted yesterday, all of our sessions are recorded and made available on our YouTube channel post-conference. So if you missed part of yesterday or you just can't choose between breakout sessions today, you'll be able to catch up with them later. Throughout the day, we hope you'll join in on the conversation here and also at hashtag CAHC 2025 across social media. As always, none of this is possible without the support of our generous sponsors who make the CAHC a success and free for you to attend. So thank you to our presenting sponsor and a deeply critical partner in our work, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. CHAFA has been supportive of the CAHC since its inception, not just through sponsorship, but through delivering and participating in countless sessions as they will today. I'd like to thank our visionary sponsor, Wells Fargo. Thank you to our champion sponsors, the Melville Charitable Trust, Connecticut Department of Housing, Liberty Bank, La Rosa Building Group, Key Bank, Capital for Change, Webster Bank, Cohn Resnick, and Robinson & Cole. We also have some fantastic foundation sponsors that I didn't get to mention yesterday. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, Connecticut Investment Advisors, the Mohegan Tribe, M&T Bank, the Construction Institute, the Housing Collective, American Eagle Credit Union, Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, Housing Development Fund, J.D. Amelia and Associates, Beacon Communities, Fairfield County's Community Foundation, Housing Ministries of New England, and the Corporation for Supportive Housing. Thank you to all of our investors, which made it possible for us to bring you more than 24 sessions across 2 days. We thank an investor sponsor at each session. We also have tons of our supporters. Thank you to each of our generous sponsors. They're featured and linked on our website. You can head to our conference page to learn more about their work and how you might partner with them. If you'd like to support the CAHC or this partnership, you can. You can make a donation by scanning the QR code, visiting the link in the chat, or by texting "Here for Housing," all caps, no spaces, to 44321. It's important for us to offer free educational content, and we super appreciate the folks yesterday that made donations to offset some of the costs of the conference. If you're an auction person, you can also browse and bid on a silent auction that will be featured during our reception. It ends tonight at 7. Link for that, I think, is in the chat too. And really exciting, save the dates for CAHC 2026. So the fun doesn't stop this year. Nothing to be sad about when the conference ends. We'll be back November 16th and 17th right here on Zoom. All right, let's get into day 2. With that, I am excited to introduce you all to the moderator of this morning's panel, David Gasson. David is a principal and founding partner of MG Housing Strategies, boutique advocacy firm focused on affordable housing issues. On behalf of MG's clients, David has advised members of Congress and the administration on policy issues affecting the economics, production, and availability of affordable housing. Since 1995, David has served as the executive director of the Housing Advisory Group, a national organization founded in 1993 to educate federal officials and advocate for the low-income housing tax credit. David's an original member of the Affordable Housing Action Campaign, where he serves on the steering committee. He's a member of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition and the National Leased Housing Association. David also advises the Council of Independent State Housing Associations on policy and advocacy, as well as the New England Housing Network, where I have the pleasure of working with him. Over his 30-plus years in the business, David has worked with numerous administrations and Congresses to expand the low-income housing tax credit, lift regulatory barriers, and educate the public and private sectors on affordable housing. Prior to joining the industry, David worked on Capitol Hill for House Majority Leader Gephardt and Senate Majority Leader Mitchell. As he marks his 30th year in the industry, last week, Affordable Housing Finance announced they would be adding David to their Affordable Housing Hall of Fame, and it's pretty easy to see why. This year, David worked with others to help score a mammoth victory, successfully campaigning for a permanent 12% low-income housing tax credit allocation increase beginning in 2026, and other program changes estimated to finance more than 1 million additional affordable housing units over the next decade. His partner at MG Strategies, Bob Moss, said David has the unique gift of incorporating his political instinct and his common sense into a viable and achievable solution when problem solving. He creates a solution that unravels the problem into fixable components. David, we're honored to have you moderating this panel. Please join me in a Zoom welcome for a true leader in our field, David Gasson.
Chelsea, thank you very much. That's very kind. I thought my fetting was going to end last night here in Chicago, HF Live, so I'm extremely honored and humbled. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here virtually with everybody tuning in from Chicago. I'm very honored to be moderating a panel of four national leaders that have been working diligently on affordable housing issues for quite some time. It is an interesting time for us in the affordable housing business, both in a good way and in challenging ways. And I cannot wait to hear what they have to say as we work our way through this panel. So let me begin by introducing each of them individually and having them tell you a little bit more about themselves. So if folks want to turn on their cameras, I'm going to start with Peggy Bailey, who I know well, from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Good morning, Peggy.
Good morning, David, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with y'all today. Just a little bit, David, I should do a little bit about the center right now?
Absolutely.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So for folks who aren't familiar with us here at the center, we're a DC-based think tank that focuses on how to make sure low and moderate income families have access to the services and supports that they need. We do that work both at the federal level, working on housing, budget, tax, food assistance, Medicaid, Social Security, income support for families, so through programs like TANF and child welfare. Um, but we also do that work at the state level, primarily through partnerships we hold with 40 states and DC and Puerto Rico through our State Priorities Partnership Network. In Connecticut, we work with Connecticut Voices for Children. And then we also do work with other partners who are experts in the field, like we do with the Partnership for Strong Communities. And all of our work is really centered in how we help programs focus on people and making sure that people are able to thrive. So it's great to be here with y'all today.
Thank you, Peggy. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deborah from the National Housing Law Project.
Great, thanks so much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Deborah Thrope from the National Housing Law Project. NHLP is a federal policy advocacy organization, and we focus on the preservation of affordable housing and tenants' rights. Really excited to be here today. NHLP also has a field network we're actually up to about 2,600 mostly legal services attorneys, but also other housing advocates and organizers that work directly in the field representing tenants. So I'll talk a bit about our federal policy advocacy today, but also draw upon our network's experience working in state and local advocacy in response to this administration. Thanks.
Thanks, Deborah. And Anne from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, you're up.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here alongside this panel of awesome colleagues from across the sector. Again, my name is Anne Oliva. I'm the CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. We are a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with a very simple mission, and that is to end homelessness in the United States. We do that through four main types of activities: policy and advocacy, both at the national level and in the state of California. We're also going to be kicking off some work in additional states over the coming months, so more to come on that. We operate a research institute where we partner with universities and researchers all over the country and do original evaluation and research here in-house on what works to end homelessness. We also have a capacity building team that walks alongside communities to implement evidence-based practices at the local level. And then lastly, we manage a strategic communications effort to make sure that policymakers and the public know what the truth is about homelessness, and that's becoming more and more challenging as we get further into this administration. So thanks for having me, David.
Oh, my pleasure. And I have to admit, I'm a little biased. It's always nice having more than one David in the room. So now I'm going to have David from the National Low Income Housing Coalition say a little bit about NLHC.
I agree. It's a strong name. Good morning, David. Good morning, everyone. I'm especially happy to be joining this group today because Connecticut was home turf for me for such a long time, and is where I started my career in the housing and homelessness services sectors. So it's good to be joining you all today. I am the Senior Vice President for Policy at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I'm approaching my 4th month here with the coalition. We were started in 1974 to advocate for the housing programs and interventions and protections that the lowest income households in this country rely upon. And something I appreciate about coming into the coalition is that we get to work across all of the silos that characterize our housing markets and production systems and federal housing programs, and think about how they all fit together or don't, and what policy fixes or advocacy are needed to make those changes. On top of our policy advocacy work, we do have state and local innovations team. I'll talk a little bit more later in the session about some of what they're doing that I think could be of interest to you. And of course, our research team that puts out Out of Reach and The Gap, are two sort of big reports characterizing trends in the low-income housing market across the country. Our state and tribal partner network includes about 47 members in most states, and a couple of tribal organization partners as well. In Connecticut, we work with Partnership for Strong Communities as our close collaborator. Good to be with you today.
Thanks, David. And since I'm moderating the panel, we get to play by some of my ground rules. So for those viewing the panel, I like freewheeling. So if we are talking about something, an issue that is specific to you or you're interested in, please do enter your questions in the Q&A box on your screen, and we will get to those as we do the panel. I do not like waiting to the end. The clock runs out quickly, and then you go away with your questions unanswered. So do not be shy in putting a question in there. Chelsea will take a look at it, and then as soon as I get to it, I will have your question read for the panelists. So much of what we do and what we're going to talk about today affects Connecticut, but things that affect Connecticut affect everybody nationwide. Between the New England Housing Network, and then a lot of the folks who are on the sponsorship screen and supporting this conference do business across the country. So this is not just issues for Connecticut. This is issues for your colleagues around the country, which is why I'm so excited to have these folks on the panel. So let's get started on the landscape and what's going on. And Peggy, I'll kick you off with this. What are the biggest shifts or threats that you are tracking in the federal housing policy under the current administration? And that is like a softball pitch, so go for it.
Exactly. So the biggest trends that we are following, sadly, are in the realm of the assault that Congress and the administration here at the federal level are perpetrating on people experiencing homelessness, on low-income people broadly, and how in this trend of demonizing people simply because they don't have enough money to afford their basic needs. In the housing, it's really complicated, as David said, kicking off the panel, right? There are some things that have happened in the supply space. I'm sure we're going to talk about the low-income housing tax credit in particular. But when it comes to helping households who don't have enough money to pay the rent, it's a completely different story. And we've got to do all we can to bring these two worlds together, because housing is a solution to homelessness. And if we allow this divide to happen and don't all collectively stand up for people with the lowest incomes, then shame on all of us. Right now, one of the biggest issues is that HUD has some flexibility within its authority to be able to do some things that we think are pretty terrible. And they're stretching that authority into some, I'll say, iffy legal territory as well. The thing that's most in front of our minds right now is what HUD put out on Friday regarding the continuum of care funding and homelessness. In that funding, in the notice of funding opportunity that HUD sent out, which is months late, and puts just in being so late, puts many programs at risk of financial instability. Within that notice, HUD is telling communities that they're going to have to cap the resources that they use for permanent housing and rapid rehousing at 30% of their continuum of care funding, and they're going to have to put the rest of it, a lot of it, at make it competitive as well, so that many programs that are used to getting resources won't, not because of anything that the program has done necessarily, but simply because now HUD is requiring the COC to put their resources at risk. The continuum of care notice also threatens communities with having scoring lower if they are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion strategies, if they are open about serving recent immigrants to the United States, and if they don't implement policies that criminalize people simply for not having enough money to pay their rent. Instituting policies. So the NOFO basically is saying, we'd rather you waste money on jails and prisons for people than on housing itself. There's still efforts, and I'm sure we'll talk about those in more detail throughout the panel, but there are efforts still underway to make this stop. Congress can act to at least extend the current arrangement that continuums of care have with HUD for, we're asking for at least a year to be able to do that, so that we just put a pause on implementing these strategies that will completely undermine our ability, people's housing and make people homeless rather than solving it. Some other things that we're worried about from the administration are, we know that in the first Trump administration, they issued a rule that we call the mixed status rule. That's the rule that would take housing assistance away from families that, where members of the family have mixed immigration status. One that's eligible for HUD and others that are not eligible for HUD assistance. This does not mean that the families that are receiving these resources are unlawfully here in the United States. It just means that they have an immigration status where they're not eligible for HUD funding. But at least the kids or someone or one of the adults are eligible for HUD funding, and we need to be able to keep those families stably housed. We're also concerned that HUD might try to implement work requirements, either broadly or through demonstration projects, where people with rental assistance would have to jump through hoops and prove that they're working in order to have access to housing. The last thing I would say is wrap up where I started with the assault on low-income people and poor people in general. We in our housing bubble have to break out of that bubble, because the things like the assaults on food stamps, the assault on Medicaid and instituting work requirements for the expansion population within Medicaid, these things also hit families' households and can destabilize their housing as well. So if we can't singularly focus just on what's happening in housing policy, we've got to move to understanding that we're family-centered, person-centered. All of these things are a part of what families need in order to survive and thrive. And we need to join the broader social services community in protecting these other programs for families as well.
Thanks, Peggy. And Peggy gets a big shout out because she did not slip into DC speak. I heard no acronyms in there. She actually spelled out exactly what each of those programs were. So kudos to you. And it is a challenging environment. And hopefully we'll get into ways that folks on the call today on the Zoom can be involved in this process to make sure Congress tries to roll back this language on continuum of care that the administration is trying to put forward. So Anne, I know I don't look it, but I go all the way back to the Reagan administration in DC. I've been doing this game for a long time and have been through a lot of administrations and a lot of Congresses. So I've been looking forward to you answering this question. And that is, what's different now than in the past? How is this administration and this Congress and how they are working and doing things different than how the challenges we have faced in the past.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, David, and no pressure at all since uh you, you since now I feel like I'm on the spotlight and like have the spotlight a little bit, but I also have been doing this for a long time. I've been at this for more than 30 years, since before the Continuum of Care program really started, even if in its early phases. And for those of you who don't know me, I also spent 10 years in federal service at HUD as a career senior executive. So to answer that question, it almost feels like I should say there's almost nothing the same right now. None of the rules that I grew up with in Washington, D.C., in government work apply anymore. And for those of us who have experience in this area, I think it's really alarming and disconcerting. And here's what I mean by that. I'm not going to go through what Peggy just outlined around the Continuum of Care program. She articulated what's happening there, I think, really clearly. But some of the things that I have observed over the last, 10 months with this administration is, first, the balance of power, obviously, between the administration and Congress is very different than anything that I have experienced, both as a staffer and as an advocate in the housing world. And what I mean by that is that Congress seems to be very reluctant to hold this administration accountable for policies that are very harmful to people that Peggy started to outline. I'm sure we'll talk about more. For illegal activity, we are currently, alongside with our partners in Rhode Island, have litigation happening around an earlier notice of funding opportunity for a program called the Continuum of Care Builds program. That had a number of pretty significant problems with that particular notice of funding opportunity. So legal problems. So the accountability structure and the balance of power, the checks and balances that I grew up with don't exist in the same way anymore. I'll just say I was hired at HUD in the Bush administration and I left in the first Trump administration. And I can't imagine having served in those 10 years and not having to respond to Congress about, which I had to do all the time. I had to go up there and explain what we were doing and why we were doing it and justify all that work. Like, I can't imagine that breakdown is helpful for anybody. But moving on, the evidence base that we have relied on to make policy decisions over the last couple of decades is completely ignored in favor of largely, I worked at the Center on Budget where Peggy works, and that is an actual think tank. So I'm not going to call these other organizations think tanks. I think they're more like propaganda mills. But the information that's coming out of those propaganda mills is not robust research. It is it's thin. It doesn't have the kind of standards behind it that we are used to. So the fact that we have no evidence base really being used to make decisions at the national level is going to impact folks at the local level pretty significantly. We are going back to policies that maybe existed in the 80s and the 90s that were proven to be ineffective or inefficient in favor of the things that are now being deprioritized. And the other, I guess the last thing that I'll note that I think is really important for folks to understand at all levels is that the folks who are making decisions at HUD are, and in many other federal agencies, are not experts in our field. They have not worked in homeless programs or developed housing themselves. They have not studied or written the regulations or the rules that we have to comply with. So there is a lot of risk related to having people who are not experts making these very significant policy decisions and resource allocation decisions. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to adversely impact states like yours, but also all the way down to, community-based nonprofit organizations and local governments are also going to be adversely impacted by these kinds of decisions that are being made by folks who are just not expert in the field.
Thank you, Anne. And there's so many. I have so many comments that come to mind that I'm trying to keep to myself because it's not my job today. But you and Peggy have done a good job laying the groundwork and setting up Deborah, because what we want to hear from Deborah on is, like, with the current federal climate, and everybody bracing for what this administration says they're going to do. What are you worried about in the context of tenant protections? They seem to be. I've said this before when people say, because we've been doing a lot of work with Congress, the administration too, they want us to build a lot of housing. They don't seem to like the people we're building it for. That's the irony of the situation. So what are you most concerned about in the context of risk to tenants? And what can, and some states are doing this, but what can states do to safeguard against the direction this administration is taking?
Great. Thanks so much, David. There are, of course, a number of attacks on tenants' rights from various directions right now. So I will highlight a few, but I'll start with one really important one, which is what Peggy touched upon, and that's the housing rights of immigrant families. So we all know, of course, this administration has placed a number of attacks on immigrant families in particular. There's been some reporting out of Chicago, for example, about ICE, landlords using ICE as a way to evict families. As I said earlier, we have a network of, 2,600 legal services attorneys that call us and kind of report about what's happening on the ground. We've seen an increase in landlord harassment of immigrant families because in some ways, a lot of landlords do feel emboldened, we think, in this political climate. And then Peggy touched upon the mixed status family rule. So this administration itself is taking actions to put immigrant families housing at risk. And we anticipate over 20,000 families could be forced to decide whether to self-evict or face an eviction action in court with the final mixed status families rule promulgated at HUD. So I'm going to touch upon some ways that states and localities are responding with respect to a number of different attacks on tenants' rights, but I know we'll go into more detail about this throughout the presentations. With respect to immigrant families, the Los Angeles Tenant Union, for example, has responded by calling for an eviction moratorium. LA is in a position right now where there's the federal occupation, of course, by the National Guard and ICE. LA has already been declared in a state of emergency. So the tenants union there is actually requesting that they take the emergency a step further and declare an eviction moratorium, because of course, for immigrant families who are facing all these challenges, they're simply not safe going to work. They're not even safe in their homes. There are a number of states that have passed anti-harassment policies to protect immigrant families. California is one of them. That's where I'm actually based. This was a policy that was put in place during the first Trump administration. And what it essentially does is prohibits landlords from harassing particularly immigrant families, and creates enforcement mechanism and remedies for that harassment. One area that we've been working a lot with local advocates on is around the idea of requiring remote hearings in court, because again, it's simply not safe for families to even appear in court. There have been a number of ICE arrests. So this is an area where folks are working with, for example, their judicial councils that set the rules for court hearings, just to create a safer environment for families, so they're not at risk just for appearing at a hearing. So along with immigrant families, federally assisted tenants are also very much at risk during this administration. Peggy touched upon work requirements and time limits. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that rule, but essentially this administration is proposing a rule that will allow housing providers the discretion to impose work requirements and time limits on most federally assisted residents. Whereas the rule is posed as discretionary, we know that in many places, housing providers are going to be under a lot of pressure to, in fact, impose these rules. And in fact, in 2 states, they may be required to implement work requirements. So Wisconsin and Arkansas are 2 states that have these types of trigger laws that say once the federal government authorizes the policy, the housing providers will be required to implement them. So we've been thinking about ways to sort of disincentivize these types of policies at a state and local level. And of course, there's still time to put pressure on lawmakers not to adopt the policies. And we'll talk more, about national commenting campaigns, for example, to stop the regulations. We're also seeing massive threats to housing affordability with respect to tenants' rights. So as we recently saw with the shutdown where SNAP benefits, many families were not receiving SNAP benefits, there was a pause. Unfortunately, it doesn't end with the shutdown. HR 1 also included additional cuts to SNAP benefits. There's going to be increases in insurance premiums that families face. So it's really important to think hard about how to keep these programs affordable in the face of benefits cuts. There's a law that was passed in California last year that essentially protects tenants from evictions due to a lag in their Social Security. So that's a really innovative way to protect families if their Social Security runs dry. And I expect we'll see more state and local policies along those lines with such risk to people losing their benefits. I also think it's important to note with respect to affordability that many housing providers like housing authorities nationwide already experiencing a budget shortfall, and that's probably not going to get any better. So housing agencies are having to make really difficult decisions. How do you serve the same number of people with less funds, right? And so there, housing authorities in particular are having to make really hard decisions about how to fund the programs, how much assistance people get, and that has lasting impacts, of course. And then the final attack that I want to talk about that is really important, and we've seen impacts of nationwide are really around these fair housing rollbacks. There have been many different attacks on the fair housing rights of families nationwide. This administration has made clear that they're essentially not interested in fair housing enforcement, and that's evidenced by a number of different actions. I'll name a few, but there are more. For one, funding threats to fair housing investigation and enforcement agencies. Those are the FIPS and the FAPS. There have been many reductions in force, so RIFs, furloughs at HUD's Fair Housing Office in particular. And then there's been a massive rescission of HUD regulations and guidance that advocates have relied on for decades. And some examples are the disparate impact liability rules, as well as requirements for limited English proficiency individuals around language access. So this is a place where states can make a really huge difference. And we've seen states, in the first Trump administration, really create their own obligation, for example, to affirmatively further fair housing, which was an Obama era rule that required states and localities to do and sort of an analysis of the impediments to fair housing and determine how these states and localities were going to overcome them. So there's a lot of room for innovation using state fair housing laws. So overall, there is a lot of risk for tenants in this administration, but there's also a number of ways that states and localities are responding to try and lessen the impacts in the short and long term.
Deborah, thanks for that. I want to respond to one of the questions we got in the queue first. And that's about what can you do in that, and then feeling helpless in this environment. And we've all been at this a long time, and I will say that you're never helpless, and you should never just sit back, take what they're doing, and not respond to it. There are a lot of different avenues and venues to do things. I know that we in the conference is in New England, and we have a primarily Democratic congressional delegation. But as I said at the beginning, a lot of the folks that are involved here are nationwide, and they are building housing in districts that are represented by Republican representatives. And I can tell you from fact that a lot of these folks are concerned about what's going on as well. And that's the avenue through which you can exercise, your ability to influence what's going on with the administration. I will bring one example specifically, and that's Congressman Mike Flood from Nebraska, who's chairman of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, who is developing the home reform bill. He is very concerned about what's going on with a lot of the programs at HUD. So um, keep at it, advocate as broadly as you can, even outside of Connecticut. Talk to your colleagues you do business with that build housing outside of New England in some of these states that are represented by Republicans, because I'm telling you, they feel it, they know it. It's the reason we have such strong bipartisan support for housing is because Republicans understand there's a housing crisis too. And the last thing they want to do when they go home is get asked the question or bombarded about why are there so many homeless people out on the street, because they got kicked out of their housing. Mabel also asked the question, I'm going to open it up to everybody. Supportive housing providers report ongoing challenges securing stable operating and service funding. We know this to be true. What policy shifts are most needed to ensure long-term sustainability of supportive housing for people exiting homelessness? And Chelsea said she's going to answer this question live, but if anybody has any thoughts on that one.
Not for me, for you all that will answer it live instead of typing it, David. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. So anybody who wants to take that one on.
And I would, I'd be happy to start, but I'm sure that my colleagues have additional thoughts. I mean, I think that the two pieces of what is showing up in this question are indeed operating support, because supportive housing generally is targeted to people who are experiencing homelessness or are exiting institutions. And they need the deepest subsidy, right? Like, so they're at maybe 0 to 30% of the area median income. And we have to target rental assistance to those folks so that even housing that is developed that is affordable in a lot of cases isn't affordable to this particular population of folks. So we need, one, to make sure that we have project-based and tenant-based rental assistance through the Housing Choice Voucher Program or through other mechanisms, whether it's at the state level like Minnesota does, or at the local level like they do here in DC, that there's permanent subsidies for folks. And then the other is really about services, and the places that are doing the best on services are using Medicaid for to provide the service dollars or to pay for at least some of the services that are needed by people who are experiencing homelessness in these permanent housing settings. So, but unfortunately, in this particular political environment, those two things are really hard to come by. And with the changes to the Continuum of Care program that Peggy talked about earlier, because permanent housing is being capped, and so much of the portfolio currently goes to permanent housing, I worry. I'm up at night thinking about what is going to happen to those projects and the people who live in them right now, because they won't be able to get the same kind of support through the COC program in the long term. So those are my quick thoughts, but I'm sure my colleagues have others.
Well, no, I would just add what we call the third leg of the stool, and that's the supply side, and making sure that either, through the low-income housing tax credit, but that alone doesn't even build one property, much less being able to fill in all of the capital needs for affordable housing broadly. So I think that we need to think about that. How much energy and how much money does it take to put together the capital that it takes to build affordable housing? And how can we do more to streamline that and invest in the programs we use, whether it's HOME, the Community Development Block Grant, the low-income housing tax credit, state resources that at the state level we put into housing capital, but making sure that as we create more housing, we're doing it so that all families, that we're making family as deeply affordable as possible, so that then families who still don't have enough income can use rental subsidies for that housing as well. It's all the capital and the rental subsidy need to go together, because for people with the lowest incomes, the rental assistance piece that Ann talked about is equally as important as actually having the unit itself. But I think we need to think outside the box a little bit too, and think about, what grant dollars can we give to developers who are willing to build housing for people with the lowest incomes, so that they can have a little free money to fill in the gaps that it takes to make deals pencil out.
David, you're on mute.
Thank you for pointing that out. I saw the little thing come up. I'm miming. So I want to move on to something that's directly relevant to this. Obviously, the government is open again. The shutdown ended, the longest one in history. And Congress is working on the next set of appropriations bills, one of which I know because we're working very closely with Senator Collins and the Senate appropriations staff. They want to do the THUD budget, which we would very much like them to do. We do not want HUD to continue to operate on a continuing resolution. So let's talk about that a little bit. And David, I'll cue you, but if anybody else wants to say anything, what are we concerned about right now in the context of the budget for HUD? We know that the Senate numbers are better than the House numbers, but in some ways the Senate numbers are still lacking. And in what areas are we specifically focused on in the context of the budget, and what can folks in Connecticut do to help influence this at this time?
Thanks, David. And I'll answer this in the first instance by backing out a little bit to talk about some of the bigger dynamics my fellow panelists have touched on. In the dynamic between Congress and the executive branch right now, for any bill, any legislation, any budget process that's going forward, we really do need Congress to be more assertive in its authority and oversight over the executive branch. So in your advocacy, as you're talking to your own congressional delegation or working with, as David mentioned, developer partners who work across jurisdictions, I think reinforcing that point at every opportunity. We're here to advocate on the THUD appropriations, and there have to be guardrails that help ensure this money gets spent, right? We're here to talk with you about the Road to Housing Act, and we have to ensure that there are guardrails to ensure that this money gets spent, right? Rescissions and impoundments and staff cuts are still very much all live strategies in this administration. In Connecticut, you have Congresswoman DeLauro, who has, been a consistent voice on the need for that kind of control and oversight from Congress. And members and their staff don't always hear when they're doing the right thing, especially when it's like an uphill battle and they're in a significant minority. So encouragement on that side can matter a great deal. I wanted to mention too, to go back to the point David was making about folks like Chair Flood and their staff on the Republican side of the aisle who know that something's wrong, but they don't always know quite what's wrong. And this administration, again, is attempting to accomplish cuts by so many different means, right? Like we saw the president's budget, and Congress largely didn't bite on the president's budget, although we're still concerned that the Senate and House versions aren't enough to keep us whole. But the administration will also attempt through staff reductions in force, through rulemaking, to get at some of their same policy objectives by other means. So as advocates, but also as state systems of care, it's really important for us to have our heads on a swivel and be planning for different scenarios. We might get an allocation or an appropriation that, in terms of the number, is similar to what we've worked with in the past, but the conditions that are attached to it mean that effectively this will mean a cut. For example, in the COC NOFO, right? If you were on the webinar last week, the HUD leadership kept reinforcing it's the largest allocation we've had, right? But if you look at the strings attached to the program and the allowable uses, we can tell the story that this is effectively a cut for lots of folks who are currently in housing. There are house staffers who just need some education on this or could be open to some education on this kind of thing. And I think there's a lesson for us in the Medicaid battle and the kind of protective work that we're having to do now on Medicaid, that the administration was able to sort of provide a cover story that, we were only going to take Medicaid away from people who didn't deserve it, and this wasn't going to effectively be a cut for a lot of folks. And that rhetorical strategy largely worked and gave enough sort of room for staff and members of Congress on the Republican side of the aisle to kind of vote along with that agenda. So educating staff, educating your delegation, really connecting the dots to what amounts to a cut, I think is really important at this stage. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Anybody else have any thoughts on the budget side? That's fine. We got a question, and this one is something we have all faced going back in time, and it's the conundrum of families and folks that are getting assistance but working their way out of it, but the traps that might lie there. People don't feel they can get ahead in the future because the state requires reports of every family income, creating anxiety that earning even a dollar more could cost them their assistance. Furthermore, low-income individuals only receive food assistance but must find money for other expenses, so many don't get paid work for fear of losing their homes before they can secure a stable income. Are there any programs that encourage these people to find the support they need to become self-sufficient in the future?
So so let's see. So this is a really important question and something that as we think about how to redesign programs. So now that things are breaking, right? Many of us right now are in a defensive posture, but we very quickly need to start thinking about how would we want to rebuild things for the future and not rebuild them in the way that they currently exist or existed before all of the breaking, but what would we do if we were designing things from scratch? And this question points out one of the issues that we have with a lot of benefit programs where there are these cliffs or these disincentives near as beneficiaries start to increase their income that prevent them from or at least give them some pause as they move up the income scale. But there are some things that have been happening to try to help with this. One is within HUD, there's a program called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. That program is a demonstration that with select families allows them to be able to. So with the rental assistance program, as the question says, as your income goes up, you pay more and more in rent until you don't get the subsidy anymore. Within the self-sufficiency program, what it allows is as your income goes up, that percentage that you would pay goes into an escrow account. So now the family's saving those resources. The rental subsidy stays at the same rate. And after 3, 5 or so years, now the family has built up savings so that there's still the incentive to be able to increase your income. And now the program is setting a family up for success. Along the way, if a car breaks down or there's some other cost a family needs to incur in order to keep working and stay stable, they can have access to that escrow account. But by and large, the point is once once the family reaches the end of the agreement, then now they've got this bucket of savings that they can use for whatever. Some families use it to be able to put a down payment on a house. Some start their own business, but it provides that nest egg that oftentimes in benefit programs that are often designed that way, a family can never get ahead, because every time you get a little bit ahead, you end up having to pay more into the system. So that's one example. Another one of my favorite examples is there are a few agencies around housing authority agencies around the country that are allowed to run demonstration projects, the moving to work programs. And while some of them use that flexibility to implement things like work requirements that we're concerned about, others do it to experiment with really cool things. And in Lawrence, Kansas, and a couple of others, they've used their flexibility to allow that as kids in the family reach 18 to 21 or 23 in some cases, their income isn't counted toward the rental assistance. So again, allowing that young adult to be able to have a job and make money to bring into the family, but not penalizing the family now by having that income count against the rental assistance. That's another strategy along that same line of how can we have government programs be the strong foundation families need to leap forward, rather than, in some instances, at certain levels, they can be limiting to families' ability to save money and succeed.
I'm just gonna jump in if that's okay. And agree that, FSS, and there are other examples of good programs that do, there's some evidence that do increase self-sufficiency. But one program where there's very little evidence that it increases work opportunities and self-sufficiency among families are work requirements and time limits in particular. So as Peggy said, there's a demonstration program nationwide. A number of public housing agencies do currently have the discretion to implement these policies. And there's little to no evidence among those programs that they're increasing self-sufficiency. And in fact, many agencies that have implemented those programs actually abandoned them later because of this. So, touching upon what Anne mentioned earlier is that we're seeing this administration propose policies that really aren't evidence-driven, and work requirements and time limits are one of those. And, even further, we know, and we're working really closely with Peggy's organization at the center, who has really great data on this, that most people who can work that are engaged in the federal housing programs do in fact work, right? So we have to call something like a work requirement policy really what it is, which is we call it the benefits cuts rule, because it's essentially a way to really strip benefits from people and reduce the size of the program, which is the ultimate goal. Because we know FSS, for example, in its demonstration, has done a much better job in supporting families to increase their income and exit the federal housing programs.
That's great insight, Deborah. Thank you. Before we leave the budget, and in the context of potential cuts we're seeing in programs, does anybody have any examples of what states are doing to prepare for this? I mean, they know what's going on. They're all involved with their delegations in DC and watching that in the context of how it's going to affect their citizens. Any insights as to what any particular states are doing to prepare for potential cuts?
I can just offer one thought. Certainly, as you mentioned, we want states to be doing advocacy at the federal level to try and stop some of these really problematic policy and resource allocation changes. But the Alliance has now done work in 2 states, Montana and Arkansas, where we sent some experts in to try and help the local continuum of care and overall community to do contingency planning. And we're going to be releasing sort of the results of that work in the coming few weeks. But that's something that we're really encouraging folks to start talking about now, like what are the contingency plans that you have in place? What work do you have to do to put those plans in place if all of these drastic changes actually become reality? So that's just one thing that I would encourage our folks in Connecticut to consider doing, and soon.
Thanks, Anne. This is something that also goes back a way because we've always said that housing is the foundation for everything. I mean, a good place and a safe place to live, leads to good health outcomes, good educational outcomes, and the ability to try to get ahead. And we're seeing lots of attacks, as you guys have already pointed out, on healthcare and Medicaid, on food assistance and SNAP, and how these could be detrimental in the end to housing. So, what should folks be concerned about and be focusing on in the context of these? We're using the term attacks. I don't think they'd like it framed that way, but that's just how it seems on food assistance and healthcare and how that could affect housing stability.
Yeah, so I can start with some specific information from Connecticut. So, a lot of you will know how hard it is to get resources from the state, right, for housing. But Connecticut is a state that has put investments into a lot of the things that we've talked about today. But unfortunately, there are these cuts and cost shifts from the federal government to states is real. So one example is in food assistance. So in HR 1, the reconciliation bill that passed in July here, it's going to shift for the first time ever. States are going to be on the hook for paying SNAP benefits for beneficiaries. So the Supplemental Nutrition and Assistance Program, that what we all call food stamps program. States have never had to pay for the benefits piece. And states are going to have to pay more for the administrative rate. So when it comes to the administrative rate, in the right now, states have been paying 50% and the federal government has been paying 50%. Now states will pay 75% and the federal government will only pay 25%. As it relates to benefits, so in Connecticut, the error rate, which is in the food assistance program, which is the way that the federal government's going to decide how much states have to pay. In Connecticut, that error rate is 10%. Now, I could spend a long time talking about why talking about it as an error rate is a mistake, how states, sure, maybe someone makes a mistake as they apply for SNAP, but states correct their error rates, but we'll set that aside. In Connecticut, it's 10%. That means that the Connecticut will have to pay 15% of the benefits of the food assistance benefits people are accepting in their state. That's $133 million that now the state will be on the hook to try to pay. And what we think from reading the legislation and the SNAP statute, that if the state can't find that $133 million, then Connecticut will not have a SNAP program at all. So now the state has to figure out a way to pay that $133 million. That is on top of, that's only about food assistance. It's not taking into account the about 200,000 Medicaid expansion folks in Connecticut whose now their Medicaid is at risk because of work requirements. And to be clear, that their Medicaid isn't at risk because they're not working. Those folks are working. Our estimates from other states that have done Medicaid work requirements is about half of the people in Connecticut that are Medicaid expansion folks will now be at risk of losing their rental assistance of their Medicaid benefits, when only about 17% of them actually are ineligible for Medicaid given the work requirements, because it's just so hard to remember that you have to fill out this extra paperwork. Some people, the jobs that they have, it's hard to get documentation. Their incomes fluctuate, and so it's hard to show how much, or their hours fluctuate, so it's hard to show how much they're working. And as a result, that's why we call these requirements, not work requirements, but proof of work, but barriers to access, because it's just another way to stop people in the door and not have to serve that in the first place. So what we're really concerned about is what I keep calling the food fight that could happen at the state level. Not because a state like Connecticut doesn't want to do better for people or be able to fill in these gaps, but it's just a lot of money to try to figure out how to find and to be able to fill in the gaps. And therefore, it puts everything the state is trying to fund at risk. And that's why, as I started out with, that we as housers need to engage in the rest of the social services community, because we have to start acting as one when we're working with the state in order to protect all of the things, because otherwise we're just playing whack-a-mole with families' budgets.
If I could quickly piggyback on that point, Peggy, another area I want to flag is around the proposal out of Social Security Administration to raise the eligibility age. So we've started talking within NLIHC about how that could change the demographics of how many older folks are experiencing poverty. SSA's own projections show several thousands of people at the 5, 10, year mark projecting forward. That interacts with how people are verified to have a disability. And we're thinking about contexts like housing programs where disability is an eligibility criterion. So it would be worth sort of gaming out that situation as well. If we have, as older folks make up a larger proportion of renters and of people experiencing homelessness, those changes being considered by Social Security Administration could have really dramatic effects.
Yeah, adding to the list of things that we're concerned about, but I want to try to leave the dark side for a second and look at some positive things that have been taking place. Obviously, and those have been in the context of the Congress and not the administration. So let's start talking about, things that are moving in the right direction. And it goes back to, I can't remember, Peggy might have said it in regards to the stool or Ann, but in the affordable housing world, we've been looking at things in kind of three perspectives: the supply of resources, the demand for resources, and then barriers to housing production or things that have been driving up the cost. And there have been some very positive things going on in Congress, both the House and the Senate, to try to address that third one: barriers to housing production and the cost to produce housing. And obviously, we did a big on the supply side with the LIHTC expansion through the OB3 bill, HR 1. So, David, can you start us off and just walk us through the Road to Housing Act, and then also touching on what is going on in the parallel front on the House side?
Yeah, so the Road to Housing Act that came out of the Senate Committee on a bipartisan basis from the Senate Banking Committee, through leadership of Senator Warren and Senator Scott, includes a lot of different provisions that each, in a modest way, try to tackle some of these problems. So there are provisions around simplifying review, simplifying approvals, making it easier to use federal programs, kind of reducing the administrative burden to apply federal programs to housing development. There's also the permanent authorization of CDBG-DR. That's a big priority for us because the fact that CDBG-DR is not permanently authorized means every time we have a disaster and it gets deployed, the agency kind of has to start afresh in writing the rules for this allocation. So as we're thinking about resilience and the how often communities are experiencing natural disasters, that could be a really impactful change. There are pieces in Road that I think advocates should be looking at now to think how they can strengthen tenant protections over the next year or two. So Road came with lifting the cap on RAD demonstrations, which NLIHC honestly had some concerns about, but that language also came with a kind of more explicit delegation to HUD of enforcement authority over tenant protections, where historically HUD has had the position it doesn't feel that it has explicit enough authority from Congress to ensure tenants' rights are protected during a RAD conversion. So that's a piece that'll need to get fleshed out, but there's something there to hold on to in uh, holding housing agencies to the protections that are supposed to apply during RAD. On the home side, we had a little exchange in the chat, the reauthorization of home that's been proposed on the House side similarly would remove some administrative barriers that make that program harder to use. David, what we heard from our developer members and folks who are doing mission-driven development on the ground is that some of the requirements within home that are meant to do things like incentivize preservation or lock in certain affordability targets just don't have that effect because in the larger sort of environment that people are trying to deploy home within, they have workarounds to those things, or they just can't. They're not considering a real opportunity to do the preservation piece. They really are just trying to do new construction. But having to navigate all of those requirements favors big developers, established developers, and leaves out smaller, maybe community-based or nonprofit developers. So we're looking for some kind of equity opportunities there. I would say too that Peggy mentioned we've got to think outside the box a little bit, and I would add be a little bit mercenary. With the LIHTC expansion that was passed out of Congress recently, we didn't get the kinds of affordability measures within that we'd hoped for. But communities can still, through grant making or layering in local resources, push those tax credits further down into deeper affordability levels. And would really encourage you all to be kind of setting the table for those conversations in the next year to make sure that we all make the most of that opportunity.
Yeah, and I want to get through this and quickly because I know we're running out of time. And are there other issues that you're concerned about in the context of what's being discussed, but things that should be totally off limits or that we need to protect?
For somebody who runs an organization called the National Alliance to End Homelessness, I'm actually not going to talk about the homeless programs in this to answer this question. I'm actually going to talk about the Housing Choice Voucher Program and our rental assistance programs. We wouldn't need all of the homeless programs in their current forms if we actually had universal vouchers, and we need to protect the vouchers that are available to families because they act as both prevention of homelessness and as an exit from homelessness to stability. So those are the things that we need to protect at all costs, in addition to the homeless programs that are serving people who are in really vulnerable situations.
Just about 3 minutes left, David.
Okay, so real quickly, I want to talk about one thing that we've been very focused on, and that's some barriers. Who can unpack the implication of federal requirements and like one of the biggest ones we confronting is BABA, Build America, Buy America, which we're hoping that we get addressed as part of the home reform bill that's in the House, but that and some of the other regulatory issues that are really preventing the production of housing. Quickly.
Quickly, I'll say NLIHC joined some of our partners in the development space, American Institute of Architects, and some other trade groups in calling on Congress to revisit BABA and accept more development from BABA. The home bill coming out of House Financial Services Committee would do that. Build America, Buy America. I served in the Biden administration at HUD, and I will say for my own part, we had to put on a brave face for BABA as kind of dutiful soldiers of that administration, but I had to grit my teeth for sure. And so it's been a relief to be able to, talk directly with our congressional delegation about how much that is inflating costs for developers and just adding to the affordability crisis in this country. So we do have some momentum on that, and where you have opportunity to add your voice to the advocacy, would encourage you to do so.
And don't even get me started on one of the issues we've been working on, which is Davis-Bacon. We're not going to go there, but that's something that in the cards stuff, driving up the cost to build housing that we've been working on. So very quickly, because we're almost out of time, a minute apiece. Let's end on a positive note. I mean, everybody give me something positive that they're looking towards working on or hopeful for.
I'm happy.
And I know there's got to be something. Go ahead, Ann.
I'm happy to start because I'm usually like Debbie Downer in these kinds of situations. So I'll start with more people are engaged right now with us as advocates and as educators than I have ever seen in my 30 plus year career. And people, and when I say people, I don't mean just people who work in our sector, people who care about their neighbors, people who don't want to see people thrown out of their permanent housing. And I find great inspiration in that every single day.
I can jump in next. I would say partnerships. So as tenants' rights advocates, oftentimes we're not necessarily partnering effectively with housing providers, for example, other national housing authority industry groups. We have so much more in common, and that's been so clear during this administration. And so something that absolutely gives me hope is these partnerships that we've all created that we will maintain. Peggy said it best earlier that we're seeing sort of the dismantling of systems. So it's such an important exercise to think about the future and rebuilding them and what will they look like. And doing that with these partnerships is so important because we want housing systems that work for everybody, for tenants, for housing providers, and other allies. So I would say partnerships have just been so critical in this moment, and they will be lasting throughout this administration and beyond.
Yeah, and I can pick up from Deborah on what the future can hold. I do believe that things are getting broken, but they're getting broken in ways that we've got to be able to fix. And so in that brokenness, there's an opportunity to go way much further than we ever have in being able to protect folks' right to housing. And as Ann said, try to get to that day when everyone has access to the resources that they need to pay for housing, so that we can properly right size what the crisis care system.
And for me, this is related to what you all have said, that I feel as though there's kind of an honesty or truth-telling in our sector about what it's really going to take to lift people out of poverty and homelessness. We can no longer afford to sort of advocate for the pieces of the system that we've been familiar with while other pieces are getting cut down. We've seen where that leads. And I'm encouraged by seeing us stand alongside each other and speak up for SNAP, Medicaid, Social Security, voucher program, homelessness programs, all in one breath. Because we've got to do better by everybody to do better by the country.
Great, thank you. And my gospel is always preach the gospel of advocacy and affordable housing. So just keep at it. I want to thank everybody for your time this morning. Wish everybody a great day. Have a fantastic conference. And with that, turn it back over to Chelsea.
Thanks so much, David. And thank you all for sticking around for just another minute or so as we close out this amazing conversation. Thank you, David, Peggy, and Deborah and David for sharing your deep knowledge with us here in Connecticut. Let's get some Zoom love for them going here. Let's see some hearts and claps for them. Thank you for the call to us as people who care about housing to act as one with people across all social services, protecting all things. As Peggy said, otherwise we're playing whack-a-mole with families' budgets. One thing I know, being Connecticut born and raised and having spent the bulk of my career here, is that Connecticut cares about our people and that we refuse to divide our neighbors into deserving and undeserving, and will continue to push policies and funding at the state and federal level that reflects those values. So I also appreciated, Peggy, you said in the brokenness, we have the opportunity to build something better. So I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to doing that with all the folks that joined us today. So I sent a link to a survey in the chat. Please take 2 minutes to tell us what you like and don't like about the conference so that we can do a better job next time. We'll take a short break now, meet back online for 11 a.m. for our next sessions. You can check those out in the lobby. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. See you all soon.